I watched her hand hover over my glass, and in that split second, 64 years of instinct told me she wasn't set just sweetening my tea. It was the 4th of July, 2018. Charleston, South Carolina. The air hung thick with barbecue smoke, laughter, and the distant crack of fireworks warming up for the night. My porch was crowded with family, friends, and all the small, familiar rituals I'd built over 3 decades in that house. But nothing, not the ribs sizzling on the grill, not Chloe's easy laughter, prepared me for the way Brittany's fingers trembled as she tore open that sugar packet. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. She glanced over her shoulder, just once, quick as a mosquito bite. Then she tilted her hand ever so slightly over my glass of sweet tea. A few pale grains fell in. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. I've spent my life reading people's micro movements on job sites and business deals and unfortunately during betrayals. That tiny calculated flick of her wrist was the same kind of motion I saw back in 1998, the night my own brother forged my signature on a deed transfer that cost me half my company. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I picked up the sweating glass slowly, pretending to take a sip. The condensation ring it left on the wooden table was almost perfect, a small, quiet circle marking the moment everything changed. I set it down near the grill, away from me. My heart was steady, but my mind had already shifted gears. Don't must make a scene, Marco. Not here, not tonight. The porch buzzed with conversation. David flipping ribs, Frank from next door setting up chairs for fireworks, Chloe rummaging through the cooler. Brittany's smile when our eyes met was too bright, too stretched. She thought she'd gotten away with something. I slipped into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh glass from the pitcher, and returned like nothing had happened. She didn't notice. She was already laughing too loudly at something David had said, performing her role like a seasoned actress. The tainted glass sat forgotten by the grill, beads of condensation sliding down its sides. I glanced at the clock above the back door, 7:18 p.m. I locked that number in my mind like a witness memorizing a license plate. And then Chloe reached for it. She was talking to David, laughing, not paying attention. She grabbed the nearest glass, lifted it, and drank deep before I could cross the porch. Chloe, wait! She blinked, confused. What? It's just tea. For a split second, Brittany's face drained of color before she recovered, pasting that practiced hostess smile back on. It was the kind of micro-expression you don't forget. The night unraveled slowly after that. At first, Chloe just said she felt a little woozy. We blamed the heat. But by 8:05 p.m., her knees gave out near the buffet table. The crash of plates hitting the floor was drowned out by fireworks bursting overhead. David rushed to catch her. Frank called 911, and I stood there watching Brittany's hands shake, not from July humidity this time, but from panic. The EMTs arrived under a sky splattered with red, white, and blue. They strapped Chloe to a gurney, her eyes half open, murmuring that she felt like she was floating. A paramedic asked if she'd taken anything. Everyone shook their heads. Brittany clung to David, playing the worried sister-in-law, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. As the ambulance lights disappeared down the street, I walked back to the grill. The sugar packet wrapper was still there, tucked behind the ketchup bottle like a forgotten clue. I picked it up gently, folded it in half, and slid it into my pocket. Evidence. I didn't know exactly what she'd slipped into that tea, but I knew this: if I confronted her now, she'd cry, deny, manipulate. David would take her side, and the night would end in chaos. No, I'd learned my lesson in '98. Anger makes noise. Patience builds cases. By the time the guests trickled out and the last sparkler fizzled, Chloe was stable at the ER. The doctors suspected a sedative but needed tox screens to confirm. Brittany played the role of the concerned sister perfectly, pacing and sighing in all the right places. David was too distracted to notice how rehearsed it all looked. When the house finally quieted around 11:30 p.m., I retreated to my office. Old habits die hard. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote at the top in careful block letters, July 4th, 2018. Incident log. I listed everything I remembered: the sugar packet, the exact time, Chloe's collapse, the ambulance's arrival. I slid the wrapper into an envelope, dated it, and tucked it into the locked desk drawer where I'd stored every critical document for decades. That drawer had held tax returns, estate plans, betrayal letters, and now the first piece of a new puzzle. The ceiling fan hummed above me as I leaned back, staring at the shadows stretching across my office. Outside, cicadas droned their endless summer chorus. My gate code hadn't changed in years. My will was outdated. Brittany had been helpful lately, always finding excuses to be around. And David, well, David avoided conflict like it was a job. I thought about the house, $699,842. Paid off, appraised last year. This wasn't just property. This was my retirement, my history, my grandchildren's inheritance. And someone had just tried to tamper with my drink on my own porch. The real betrayal wasn't just what she'd done. It was that she thought I wouldn't notice. As midnight crept in, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't confront her tomorrow. I wouldn't raise my voice or play into her performance. I'd be patient. I'd be methodical. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't be a family squabble. It would be under courtroom lights, with evidence stacked like bricks and masks stripped away. I locked the drawer, turned off the light, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was heavy and quiet now, except for one stray firework popping somewhere down the street. I smiled, cold, deliberate, because Brittany had just lit a fuse, and she didn't even know it. The morning after Chloe collapsed, Charleston woke up in that heavy, wet way it does in July, air like a soaked towel, sunlight hitting the porch boards before my coffee even cooled. Normally, I love that porch. I built it with my own hands in 1991, replacing every warped plank myself. It's the heart of this house. But that morning I stood at the screen door and hesitated before stepping out. For the first time in years, the place felt violated. I kept replaying Brittany's hand over my glass in my head. That quick, guilty flick, Chloe collapsing, her blank, floating stare in the ambulance. Every detail was like a nail tapping the inside of my skull. I sat in my usual rocking chair with my coffee and legal pad from the night before. I'd written the title in block letters, July 4th, 2018, Incident Log. It was underlined twice. The sugar packet wrapper was still tucked in its envelope inside the locked desk drawer. I ran my thumb over the pad's edge, thinking about all the years I'd trusted this house to keep family safe. That trust cracked last night. Around 8:15 a.m., the hospital called. Chloe was awake, groggy but stable. They found zolpidem and traces of scopolamine in her blood, sedatives, the kind usually used for insomnia or motion sickness. I thanked the nurse, hung up, and just sat there staring at the humidity rising off my lawn like steam. Zolpidem, scopolamine. I knew those names. Linda, my late wife, took zolpidem for years. I remember picking it up from the CVS on King Street. That receipt was burned into my memory. $428 one month when insurance messed up the refill. I could still picture the exact font on the receipt. That number stuck with me because back then, $428 was a real chunk of our monthly budget. I wasn't going to accuse Brittany yet, but something told me to look. So I slipped on my sandals and headed down the short hallway toward the kitchen trash. I pulled out the tied-off white bag from under the sink, set it on the floor, and started going through it piece by piece like I was panning for gold. Halfway through, under greasy napkins and the husk of a watermelon rind, I found it, a crumpled pharmacy receipt. CVS King Street. June 4th, 2018. The total, $428.17. I smoothed it flat against the counter. My heart was beating slow but heavy. The name on the pickup line was Brittany DeLuca. The listed prescriptions? Zolpidem 10 milligrams. Scopolamine patches. The same combination Chloe had ingested. I stared at that receipt for a long time. The sound of cicadas outside grew so loud it almost felt like static in my ears. I didn't need to jump to conclusions. I needed to document. I pulled open my drawer, grabbed a new envelope, labeled it CVS receipt June 4th, and slid the paper inside. Then I locked it in the desk, right next to the sugar wrapper envelope. One piece at a time, Marco, brick by brick. That evening, David stopped by. He looked tired the way sons do when they're caught between their wife and their father. He leaned against the porch railing while the sky turned that molten gold you only get in Charleston summers. Chloe sips okay, he said finally. She sips embarrassed, thinks maybe it was a bad reaction to something she ate. Is that what Brittany thinks too? I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. Dad, don't start. I didn't at push. Not yet. You know, David, I built this porch so we always have a place to talk. No shouting, no slam doors. I'm not shouting, he muttered. I looked at my son, 38, smart, but always allergic to confrontation. Linda used to say he had a good heart, but a soft shell. She was right. I just hope, I said slowly, that when something doesn't feel right, you don't bury it under excuses. Because buried things have a way of rotting. He looked at me, searching my face for a clue, maybe a trap, but I gave him nothing. Let him stew. He left after a few awkward minutes, and I stayed out there long after the mosquitoes came. At 10:02 p.m., for the first time in as long as I could remember, I locked the porch door. Not just the front door, the porch. That door had always been left open, a symbolic welcome to family and friends. But tonight the key clicked in the deadbolt with a finality that made my chest tighten. It wasn't that paranoia. It was boundary setting. I walked through the house, turning off lights, my bare feet creaking against familiar wood. In the hallway mirror I caught a glimpse of my own face, lined, serious, not the easy smile people remember from my contractor days. I'd spent decades building things that lasted: roofs, staircases, trust. But betrayal doesn't come with a wrecking ball. It seeps in through the cracks you stop checking. Before bed, I pulled the receipt envelope out one last time. I ran my fingers over the date, June 4th, 1 month before the barbecue. Zolpidem and scopolamine, Brittany's name. That wasn't set a coincidence. I returned it to the drawer, locked it, and exhaled slowly. The cicadas had gone quiet now, replaced by the low hum of night traffic from the main road. Charleston summers have a way of pressing down on you, heavy and wet, like they're daring you to move. I wasn't collapsing. I was bracing. The porch light outside cast a faint glow through the slats of the blinds. It made long, clean lines on the floorboards like bars. And that night, for the first time, I understood I wasn't just protecting a house. I was preparing for war. By the second week of June 2018, my mornings had changed. I still made my coffee the same way. 2 sugars, splash of cream, but now the legal pad sat beside the mug like a silent witness. Every day after sipping that first hot mouthful, I'd add a line or two times names. Odd details. It was a habit I picked up in the late 90s when lawyers told me, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Brittany had no idea that the same man who built her patio pergola could also build airtight legal traps. On June 10, 2018, I drove downtown to Meeting Street. Marla Green's office is in a narrow brick building with a brass plaque that still shines like it's polished daily. Marla had handled my estate paperwork for 15 years through Linda's passing, through property refinancing, through every cautious update I'd made since betrayal burned me once already. She greeted me with her usual sharp smile. Marco, she said, when you call for an unscheduled meeting, it says either something urgent or something smart. Which is it today? Both, I replied. We sat in her book-lined office, ceiling fans stirring the warm air. I laid out the situation carefully. The July 4th incident, Chloe's talk screen, the sugar packet, the pharmacy receipt. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I just gave her facts like bricks. Marla leaned back, tapping her pen against her notepad. You were right not to confront her, she said. Finally, if Brittany is planning something, it's probably about incapacitation and estate control. Will get ahead of her. She drafted new clauses into my will, incapacity safeguards, a strict no-contest clause, and language that would void any forged power of attorney attempts. She explained every line to me slowly. I listened carefully, committing dates to memory. Before I left, she slid 2 documents across the desk. One is a HIPAA release, she said. If anyone tries to claim you scepter unfit medically, this lets your designated allies access your records fast. The other is an updated estate summary. Keep them somewhere safe. I nodded. Marla, I don't plan to go down without a record. She smiled faintly. I expect nothing less from you. Frank noticed the shift before David did. He's my neighbor and oldest friend, retired Charleston PD, 67, with the kind of instincts that never turn off. On June 12th, I was out by the mailbox when he leaned over the fence. You've been looking like a man who's counting pieces before the game starts, he said. I chuckled softly. You ever get the feeling you start being tested again, Frank? Always. Who seps the opponent this time? Family, I answered. His expression hardened in that cop way. Then you play patient, Marco. You play smart. You want help? Yeah, I said, but quiet help. We talked in low tones by the hydrangeas. He suggested I install a ring camera at the gate. New code, fresh locks. He also gave me the name of a PI he trusted from his days on the force. Shaw, Frank said. 52. Ex-insurance investigations. Straight arrow. If Brittany sips moving money or documents behind your back, he said'll find the trail. I wrote the name down on my notepad and underlined it twice. June 18th. I met Shaw in a diner off Savannah Highway, the kind where the booths are cracked vinyl, and the coffee comes hot and fast. He was tall, with weathered skin and calm eyes, the kind of man who blends into the background but misses nothing. Mr. DeLuca, he greeted me, sliding into the booth. Frank filled me in a bit. Family matters are delicate. I appreciated that he didn't treat me like some paranoid old man. I handed him a folder with copies of the CVS receipt, the talk screen summary Chloe gave me, and photos of Brittany from family events. I don't want anything illegal, I said firmly. But I do want eyes on her movements, documents, property records, any visits to the Register of Deeds, that kind of thing. Shaw nodded. That SIP's all standard. We sell log dates, times, and copies of anything filed. If she SIPs a laying groundwork, we sell no before she thinks you do. Before we parted, I slid a retainer check across the table. He didn't blink. Give me 2 weeks, he said. You shall have something. Meanwhile, at home, I made small, invisible moves. I updated the gate code on July 5th, just after midnight, without telling anyone. The ring cam went up the next morning, angled perfectly toward the drive. I moved my will and HIPAA documents into the fireproof safe in my bedroom closet, along with the evidence envelopes. Every night I wrote updates in my logbook. June 18th, met Shaw. Retainer paid. Gate code changed July 5th. Ring cam installed July 6th. I didn't breathe a word to David. He still dropped by occasionally, usually to talk about work or grill on the weekends, but he never noticed the subtle changes, or maybe he didn't want to. Brittany, though, she watched me sometimes with that polite smile, like she was trying to read whether I'd noticed something. I made sure my expression was always calm, predictable, boring. Let her think I was fading into retirement routines. She had no idea the old man she underestimated was already moving pieces behind closed doors. By the end of June, I had a small but solid foundation: legal protection, PI surveillance, physical security upgrades, and allies who understood discretion. I hadn't raised my voice once. I sat on the porch one night, logbook on my lap, the cicadas thrumming under the Charleston stars. I thought about Linda, about how proud she'd be that I wasn't letting this slide. Betrayal had taken too much from me once before. This time I said meet it with quiet precision. And the best part? Brittany still thought she held the upper hand. There's a strange quiet that settles on Charleston summer nights when the air gets thick enough to muffle even the cicadas. Late July 2018 had a few nights like that. The house creaked softly, and I found myself awake more often than asleep, half listening for footsteps that never came, half turning over the same puzzle pieces in my mind. Brittany had kept her distance since July 4th. She was polite at family dinners, careful in her tone, but I could tell she was watching me for signs, waiting to see if I'd noticed. I gave her nothing. I let the days stretch long and uneventful, exactly the way she wanted them to. But then came the night that almost made me second-guess everything. It was July 27th, a sticky Friday night. I'd been on the porch going through Shaw's first surveillance packet, 2 manila envelopes filled with neat reports, Register of Deeds visit logs, and some grainy photos. She'd visited the county register twice, once on July 13th and again on the 19th. Both times she'd lingered near the property records counter. That wasn't proof, but it was enough to keep my guard up. I was halfway through a second cup of coffee when I heard voices drifting through the open living room window. David and Brittany. The tone made me freeze. It wasn't their usual bickering, she was crying. David, I didn't want to tell you like this, she said between shaky breaths, but I can't sleep anymore. I just been drowning. Her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before. I thought we had everything handled, David said. Britt, what is this? There was a pause. I leaned closer to the screen, heart beating steady but heavy. It's 72,000, she whispered. David Sipp's reaction was immediate. 72. What? Dollars? Yes, she sobbed. It sold credit cards, the medical bills from my mom, and the stupid loan I took for the boutique. I thought I could manage it, but the interest just spiraled. I didn't want to dump this on you. I sat back in my chair, the wood groaning beneath me. $72,000. That wasn't small, that was motive-sized. She continued, voice trembling. I was trying to protect us. You know your dad sits house. It sets security for the whole family. If something happened to him and everything got tied up in probate or lawyers, David, we ruined. I panicked, okay? I just wanted to feel like the future was safe. Her words slipped through the window like poison wrapped in silk. She wasn't just admitting desperation, she was framing it as love, as protection. David sighed. A long, defeated sound. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because you always say your dad doesn't trust me, she snapped suddenly, then softened again. I wanted to prove I could handle things, but I can't anymore. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was weighted, dense. And in that silence, for the first time since July 4th, doubt crept in. I remembered Linda Sipp's voice from years ago telling me, not every wrong is malice, Marco. Sometimes it's Sipp's fear wearing a bad disguise. I stared out at the dark yard. If Brittany really was that deep in debt, maybe her behavior came from panic, not scheming. Maybe the sugar packet was something else. Maybe Chloe's reaction had been a coincidence. For one dangerous minute, I let myself imagine I'd misread everything. I even imagined walking into that room, putting a hand on Brittany's shoulder, and asking straight out what she'd been planning. But I didn't move. Instead, I listened. David spoke first. We figure it out, he said softly. But you have to stop hiding things from me. No more secrets. Promise me. I promise, she whispered. I heard the sound of their hug, the rustle of fabric, a shaky exhale. Then David said the words that made my stomach tighten. Dad doesn't have to know about this yet. I closed my eyes. There it was, the wedge. Brittany hadn't confessed to me. She'd confessed to him privately, in a way that made her look vulnerable and human. And David, my son, was slipping right into the role she needed him to play. I didn't blame him. He loved her, and Brittany was smart enough to weaponize her vulnerability. When the house fell quiet again, I stayed on the porch for nearly an hour. My coffee went cold. The night deepened around me. That conversation shifted something inside me, not my strategy, but my understanding. Brittany wasn't a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. She was a desperate woman in debt, skilled at playing emotional chess. She wasn't reckless. She was strategic. Her vulnerability was part of the performance, whether she knew it consciously or not. And for a moment, it worked on me. That's what scared me most. I went inside, opened my locked desk drawer and looked at the envelopes stacked there. The sugar packet, the CVS receipt, the legal log, concrete evidence, not feelings, not stories, facts. I whispered to myself. Don't let sympathy erase proof. Then I wrote in the logbook. July 27th. Overheard Brittany confess $72,000 debt to David. Emotional framing, family security. David agrees to secrecy. I closed the logbook slowly. Doubt had crept in, yes, but now I understood the game better. She wasn't just trying to get to the house through force. She was weaving narratives. She was working on David first. And that meant my revenge couldn't just be legal. It had to be psychological, patient, surgical. Because if Brittany could make me doubt my own instincts for even one night, then she was more dangerous than I'd thought. By the end of July 2018, my doubt had hardened into strategy. That overheard confession didn't soften me. It sharpened me. Brittany wasn't panicking blindly. She was maneuvering, and if she was maneuvering, I could set the board. Charleston summer nights are their own kind of sticky. You can feel the heat clinging to the porch railings settling into your skin. It was on one of those nights, July 29th, that I finalized my first real countermove. I didn't set confront. I baited. Frank came over just after dusk, wearing his old CPD baseball cap and carrying 2 cold beers. He sat down next to me on the porch swing, letting it creak under his weight. "You look like a man about to play a long game," he said. "I am," I replied. "And I need Brittany to make the first greedy move." Frank raised an eyebrow. "So what sips the hook?" "Money," I said. "She seps already circling my estate. She thinks I seps slowing down. So I seps'll give her a little story to chew on." I told him my plan, a staged conversation about a $50,000 certificate of deposit I supposedly intended to cash early to renovate the house. A conversation Brittany was meant to overhear. Something to stir that quiet panic she'd confessed to David but also tempt her into action. Frank chuckled low. "That sip's nasty in the good way." "It sip's legal," I said. "And if she bites, she said'll leave tracks." The next day, July 30th. I set the stage. David and Brittany came over for Sunday lunch, grilled chicken, sweet tea, the usual family warmth that now felt like theater. Brittany wore a light blue sundress and that carefully constructed smile, the one that said, "I'm harmless." After lunch, I asked David to help me look over some renovation numbers at the dining table. Brittany busied herself in the kitchen, rinsing dishes but staying within earshot exactly as I hoped. I laid out some papers, old contractor estimates, a blank notepad, and an envelope labeled CD Renewal. Inside was a fabricated bank letter I'd typed up myself on my printer. It wasn't fraudulent. It didn't claim to be from the bank. It was just a believable-looking document with numbers that would make someone in debt start dreaming. David scanned it absently. "Why are we talking about this now, Dad?" "I just am thinking of cashing it out early," I said casually, just loud enough for the kitchen to hear. 50,000 could go a long way toward fixing the roof and redoing the porch railings. Its SEP's been sitting there since 2002. At my age, what SIP's the point of waiting another decade? There was a tiny sound from the kitchen, a clink of a plate hitting the sink a bit too hard. Brittany sipped. His ears were working. David shrugged. "That SIP's your call." I nodded slowly, tapping the envelope against the table. "Still, I don't want to trigger any tax penalties. I might go to the bank this week and talk to Marla about how it affects the estate plans." The trap was baited. I caught a glimpse of Brittany out of the corner of my eye. She froze mid-wipe of a dish, her brow furrowed. Then she resumed, humming too loudly, as if covering her tracks. Meanwhile, Shaw's updates were starting to form a pattern. On August 2nd, he called me from his car. "She sets moving," he said. "Visited the Register of Deeds again today. Spent 20 minutes at the property title kiosk. Printed something. Folded it into her purse." "Any idea what she printed?" I asked. "I pulled the visitor log after she left. She looked up your property again. Exactly as expected. I documented it in my logbook that night. August 2nd. Shaw reports Brittany printed property records. Bait appears to be working. Next step, security tightening." On August 4th, Frank and I changed the locks on the back gate and the utility door. I sipped already updated the gate code in early July. But this was a second layer. As Frank unscrewed the old deadbolt, he muttered, "If she seps planning something, she seps gonna get frustrated before she gets inside." "That seps the point," I said. The Ring camera caught its first interesting moment 2 nights later. At 11:47 p.m. on August 6th, Motion alert pinged my phone. Playback showed Brittany's car pulling up outside the gate. She didn't get out, but the headlights lingered for a solid 30 seconds before she drove off. Not illegal, not proof, but unsettling. I saved the footage and added a note. August 6th, Brittany loitered outside gate, no entry. Ring footage saved. By mid-August, the threads were tightening exactly the way I'd hoped. Brittany was circling, testing boundaries, reacting to the bait. But she hadn't made a reckless move yet, which meant she was cautious, and that made her dangerous. Marla and I met again on August 10th to review preliminary tarot, temporary restraining order paperwork. She was methodical, as always, drafting everything carefully so that if Brittany tried anything forged or coercive, we'd have injunction paperwork ready within 24 hours. Marco, she said, sliding the draft across her polished desk. The key is to be ready before she knows you sup are ready. Once she makes her move, this gives us the ability to freeze everything before it spirals. I ran my fingers over the legal language, feeling that quiet sense of control return. This wasn't rage, this was engineering. The last piece of Act 4 fell into place on August 12th. Shaw delivered a manila envelope with photos, Brittany handing something to a man outside a downtown notary office. The timestamp read 2:43 p.m. Envelope exchange. Shaw said, "Can have set tell what sets inside, but this is the same guy who notarizes a lot of real estate docs." I checked his log. She sets scheduled an appointment next week. That was it. The baited hook was set deep. I looked at the photos for a long time, then slipped them into my evidence drawer. The web was tightening, thread by thread, and Brittany didn't even realize she'd wandered straight into the center. By late July, the bait had done its work. The property record searches, the late-night loitering, the envelope handoff at the notary's office. It was all movement without confrontation. And I knew from experience when someone like Brittany believes she's getting ahead of you, they get sloppy. August 15th, 2018, started hot and stayed hot. Charleston summer heat doesn't just sit, it presses. I was on the porch early that morning, legal pad in hand, noting the dates Shaw had sent me in his latest surveillance packet. Her notary appointment was set for August 17th. That gave me exactly 2 days to close the jaws around her. The trick with traps like this isn't speed, it's timing. Marla and I met that afternoon at her office on Meeting Street. She had her glasses perched low on her nose, scanning the paperwork Shaw had forwarded, copies of the property lookups, photographs of Brittany near the real estate counter, the envelope exchange timestamped at 2:43 p.m. "This is building nicely," Marla said, tapping the notary photo with her pen. "But we still need her to make a definitive legal misstep. Something documentable, forgery, fraud, attempted transfer. We can just catch her hovering, we need her holding the knife." "I know," I said, "and I think I know how to make her swing it." Marla looked up. "Go on." "I want to schedule a fake will update meeting," I said. "Something that looks real enough for her to catch wind of it. Make her think I stum making changes she's stums not included in." Her smile was sharp. That might do it. On August 16th, Marla Sepp's assistant placed a call to my house line while Brittany was there helping David with some errands. The assistant Sepp's voice was loud, clear, and rehearsed. "Mr. DeLuca, this is Connie from Marla Green Sepp's office. We are confirming your will update appointment for Friday, August 17th at 10 a.m. I made a show of cupping the receiver. "Yes, Connie, that works. Tell Marla Asset'll bring the updated beneficiary notes." Brittany was in the hallway, folding laundry. She froze mid-fold, towel in her hands. I didn't look directly at her, but I saw it out of the corner of my eye, the pause, the flicker of calculation. Perfect. The next day, August 17th, I staged the house exactly as planned. Papers out on the dining table, envelopes stacked, pen lying across a legal pad with Will UPED date, Marla Green written at the top. I even parked my truck facing out, like I was about to leave for the appointment. Meanwhile, Shaw was downtown tailing Brittany. At 9:46 a.m., he texted me, "She sips here. Notary office, alone." At 10:11 a.m., signed document, left with folder, headed toward Register of Deeds. By 10:32, I had another text. Attempted to file quit claim deed. Clerk flagged signature mismatch. She looked nervous, left building quickly. I exhaled slowly. She sat, bitten. She had taken a forged durable power of attorney, one she must have notarized during that August 17th appointment, and tried to use it to file a quit-claim deed transferring my Charleston property to a joint ownership between herself and David. But because Marla and I had already lodged identity verification updates in the Register of Deeds back in June, her forgery didn't match. The clerk didn't file it, but Shaw got the affidavit copy, time-stamped and signed. Evidence clean and airtight. That evening we had a family dinner. David grilled steaks, Brittany made her famous peach cobbler. It was one of those humid Charleston nights where the porch fans do their best but never quite win. The sky was streaked orange and pink as we sat down to eat. Brittany was radiant, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. She laughed freely, touched David's arm often, even joked with me about the weather. She believed her forgery had worked. She believed the trap had sprung in her favor. I played my part, smiling, nodding, asking about her sister Chloe's recovery. The cobbler was too sweet, but I ate every bite. Frank was there too, at my request. He knows how to watch people without seeming like he Seps watching. Over dessert, he leaned close and murmured, "She Seps got that look, Marco. Like a cat that just knocks something off a shelf and thinks nobody heard." "I heard," I whispered back. The irony of that dinner wasn't lost on me. We were sitting at the same table where weeks earlier she'd slipped something into my drink. Now she was smiling at me like family while her forged document sat flagged in the Register of Deeds legal logs downtown. Later that night, after everyone left, I retrieved Shaw's envelope from the safe. Inside was the clerk's affidavit, the timestamp, the notary journal copy he'd acquired, and photographs of Brittany entering and leaving the building. I laid everything out on the table under the warm glow of the kitchen light, each piece a thread, together a noose. I wrote in the logbook, August 17th, Brittany forged DPOA. Attempted quitclaim deed. Clerk flagged mismatch. Shaw retrieved affidavit plus notary journal copy. Evidence secured. I underlined the date twice. The hook was set. She thought she was winning, but in truth she just handed me exactly what Marla had been waiting for, proof of intent, action, and fraud. The baiting was over. The real game had begun. By early fall 2018, Charleston's heat was still clinging stubbornly to the evenings, but the edges had started to soften. You could feel the shift in the breeze at night. The faintest hint that summer's hold was loosening. My trap was fully set. Evidence was stacking neatly in my drawer, and Brittany had no idea she'd already crossed the line she could never uncross. And that's when she made her move. The kind people make when they sense tension but think charm can smooth it over. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September. I remember because the Saints were playing the Falcons, and David was glued to the TV in the den. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon. Brittany had baked banana bread. She arrived alone, carrying it in a blue ceramic dish, smiling like she was stepping into a commercial for Family Harmony. "Marco," she said softly, almost too softly, "do you have a minute to talk? Just us?" I didn't invite her to sit right away. I watched her carefully. She looked different that day. Hair pulled back neatly, wearing a cream cardigan over a floral dress. She dressed deliberately, like someone trying to project innocence. I gestured to the porch. "Let's talk out there." The September light filtered through the magnolia trees, dappling the wooden boards as we sat. She placed the dish between us like a peace offering. "I feel like we haven't really talked since everything with Chloe," she began. Her voice was warm, practiced. "And I hate that. You Setter, David Setcher's father. You Setter family. I don't Setter want there to be this wall between us." I kept my face neutral. "I didn't know there was a wall." She laughed lightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, sometimes you sipped are hard to read." That was deliberate. She inhaled slowly, like she was gathering courage. "Marco, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about the house, about what happens if, God forbid, something unexpected happens. David and I just want to make sure everything's simple, no legal messes, no fights. You've built such a beautiful legacy here, and I'd hate to see it get tangled up in court after you're gone." There it was. The real reason for the visit, wrapped in concern and banana bread. I leaned back in my chair, letting her talk. She continued, "Probate can take months, sometimes years, and families fight over the smallest things. I've seen it happen with my Aunt Seps's house. Everyone got greedy, and it broke them apart. I don't want that for us." That word slid off her tongue like honey. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked evenly. She hesitated just long enough for me to catch the flicker of calculation behind her eyes. "Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's a way to adjust some of the estate planning now, to make things cleaner. So that David and I don't have to worry about lawyers or taxes later. It would give everyone peace of mind." Everyone, meaning her. She was trying to gaslight me, to make me feel like the reasonable protective thing to do was to give her a clearer path to the estate. She didn't know I'd already seen her forge a DPOA. She didn't know Shaw had photos, the register had affidavits, and Marla had tarot paperwork ready to deploy. But she thought she still had the upper hand. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly. Her shoulders relaxed, mistaking my even tone for receptiveness. "I knew you'd understand," she said brightly. "Honestly, Marco, you've always been the kind of man who plans ahead. I admire that. This isn't about money, you know. It's about making sure David and I can keep the house safe. For the family." That last line almost made me laugh. She was doubling down on the family protector narrative she'd used with David back in July. Only this time she was aiming it at me directly, hoping charm and sincerity could erase the trail of her actions. I didn't interrupt her. I let her pour out the entire pitch: probate horror stories, anecdotes about distant relatives, even a self-deprecating joke about her own bad financial decisions. The entire time I nodded slowly, as though considering. Inside, I was cataloging every sentence, every manipulative beat. When she finally stopped, I simply said, "I said I'll think about it. That's all. No promises, no fight. Just the quiet assurance of a man who isn't falling for it." She smiled with visible relief. "Thank you, Marco. That means a lot." We stood, exchanged a polite hug that felt like two actors hitting their marks, and she left the banana bread on the table. As her car disappeared down the street, I sat back down and exhaled. This wasn't reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. She wasn't confessing. She was testing the waters. She was trying to see if I'd give her the very thing she'd already tried to steal. I brought the banana bread inside and set it on the counter without taking a bite. Then I opened my drawer, pulled out my logbook, and wrote, "September 23rd, Brittany visit. Emotional appeal re estate simplification. Attempted gaslight, framed as family concern. No confrontation. Response neutral. Evidence intact." I underlined gaslight twice. This act told me something critical. Brittany wasn't going to back off. She wasn't remorseful. She was doubling down with charm. And that meant the courtroom showdown wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. August 15th, 2019 was a Thursday. The kind of Charleston morning where the air feels like it's been simmering since dawn. I remember standing on my porch at 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, staring at the magnolia trees that lined the driveway. For a moment everything was quiet, deceptively peaceful. In exactly 4 hours we'd be in the Charleston County Courthouse. A year's worth of evidence, every receipt, log entry, notarized affidavit, ring cam clip, and surveillance photo was packed into 2 leather briefcases by the door. One was mine. The other was Marla Green's. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was a legal reckoning. Frank pulled into my driveway at 7:05 sharp like he always did. He stepped out of his truck wearing his best navy blazer. "You ready for this, Marco?" I took a slow breath. I've been ready since July 4th last year. Walking into the courthouse that morning was like stepping into a pressure chamber. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. Brittany arrived 10 minutes after us, looking polished in a cream blouse and black skirt, hair pinned neatly. She carried herself like a woman about to win something. David trailed beside her, looking nervous, his hands jammed into his pockets. He caught my eye briefly, then looked away. Brittany didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just scanned the hallway with that same sharp, calculating gaze she'd used at my dining table a year earlier. Inside courtroom 4B, the ceiling fans spun slowly, doing little to cut through the humidity. A few reporters were scattered along the back benches. Property fraud cases weren't exactly headline news, but Charleston's courthouse always had a couple of local stringers watching for juicy inheritance dramas. When the bailiff called the room to order, a hush fell like a dropped curtain. The judge was Honorable Meredith Connolly, mid-50s, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and sharp memory for detail. She adjusted her glasses and glanced over the docket. "This is Connolly versus DeLuca, petition for injunction and referral for criminal fraud," she read aloud. "Counsel, appearances, please." Marla rose smoothly. "Marla Green for Mr. Marco DeLuca, Your Honor." Brittany Sipp's lawyer, a slick two-tan man named Peters, stood. "Thomas Peters for Mrs. Brittany DeLuca." David shifted uncomfortably in the gallery. Marla opened like a scalpel. No theatrics, just precision. "Your Honor, over the course of 13 months, my client, Mr. DeLuca, has documented a sustained pattern of fraudulent activity by his daughter-in-law, Brittany DeLuca, aimed at unlawfully obtaining partial control of his $699,842 Charleston estate. This began on July 4, 2018, and culminated in an attempted property transfer using a forged durable power of attorney filed at the Charleston Register of Deeds on August 17, 2018. She gestured to the evidence table. "We will present receipts, sworn affidavits, surveillance records, notarized documents, and witness testimony, including that of Chloe Anderson, to demonstrate both motive and action." Brittany sat perfectly still, chin lifted. "First up, the sugar packet wrapper." Marla held it up carefully in an evidence sleeve. "This was recovered from Mr. DeLuca Sepp's July 4, 2018 family gathering, immediately after Brittany DeLuca was observed tampering with Mr. DeLuca Sepp's iced tea. The wrapper tested positive for zolpidem traces." Peters objected. "Relevance." But Connolly overruled. Then came the CVS receipt from June 4, 2018, showing Brittany purchasing zolpidem and scopolamine. Marla slid it onto the projector. The numbers were crisp. The name Brittany DeLuca underlined in red. $428.17, Marla said, letting the figure hang in the air. I watched Brittany's fingers tighten around her lawyer's arm. Next, Chloe Sepp's testimony. Chloe walked nervously to the stand, but she looked healthier than she had a year ago. She raised her right hand, swore in, and glanced at me briefly before facing the courtroom. She described clearly and simply how she'd grabbed the wrong glass at the barbecue, how she'd collapsed, how the ER doctors had found zolpidem and scopolamine in her system. "And did anyone else drink from that glass before you did?" Marla asked. "No," Chloe said. "It was sitting by the grill. Marco had set it there." Peters tried to rattle her, suggesting stress or heat stroke. Chloe didn't budge. "They showed me the toxicology report," she said firmly. "This wasn't heat stroke." Then came Shaw Sipp's surveillance. Marla handed over his meticulously kept timeline. July 13th and 19, 2018, Brittany visits the Register of Deeds. August 2nd, prints property title records. August 17th, enters notary office, signs document, proceeds to Register of Deeds to file forged DPOA and quitclaim deed. The clerk's affidavit was projected next, along with a notarization log and security camera stills. Brittany's signature attempt had been flagged because it didn't match the verified exemplar Marla and I had filed earlier in the summer. Judge Connolly leaned forward slightly. "This is contemporaneous documentation." "Yes, Your Honor," Marla said. "All independently time-stamped and verified." Finally, ring cam footage. Frank had insisted on helping me set up the playback for this part. At 11:47 p.m. on August 6, 2018, Brittany's car headlights illuminated my gate. She lingered there for 30 seconds. Marla didn't claim this was criminal by itself, but she let it add to the mosaic, a pattern of behavior, not isolated incidents. Peters tried to fight back. He argued that Brittany was motivated by concern for the family, that she was confused about legal processes, and that no financial harm had actually occurred. Marla was ready. She stepped to the center of the courtroom, calm as a surgeon. Your Honor, we are not here because harm was completed. We are here because harm was attempted with motive, premeditation, and fraudulent documentation. This is not confusion. This is calculation, and the law provides remedies for precisely this scenario. Then Brittany made her mistake. When Marla introduced the forged DPOA into evidence, Brittany whispered something harshly to Peters. The judge noticed, Mrs. DeLuca, if you wish to speak, you may be sworn in and testify. Otherwise, refrain from commentary. Brittany stood suddenly. Fine. I shall testify. Peter's sefta face went pale. She took the stand, hands folded tightly. At first she kept her composure, talking about family loyalty, her financial worries, how she just wanted to protect everyone. But under Marla's questioning, cracks formed fast. Mrs. DeLuca, Marla said evenly, did you or did you not sign a durable power of attorney document in front of a notary on August 17th, 2018? I signed something, Brittany said. Did you attempt to file a quitclaim deed that same day? I didn't file anything. But you attempted to? Silence. Yes or no? Mrs. DeLuca. Brittany Sipp's jaw tightened. Yes. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Marla nodded slowly. No further questions. Judge Connolly delivered her ruling just after 2:15 p.m. In light of the documentary evidence, testimony, and the respondent's own admissions, this court grants the injunction requested by Mr. DeLuca. All property and estate documents shall be frozen from alteration without court oversight. Furthermore, the forged durable power of attorney and attempted quitclaim deed are referred to the district attorney for criminal fraud investigation. Her gavel came down sharply. Brittany's composure finally cracked. This is insane, she hissed, standing abruptly. The bailiff took a step forward, but Peters pulled her back down. David just sat there, stunned, eyes darting between us. The reporters scribbled notes. Chloe exhaled shakily. Frank squeezed my shoulder. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Because for the first time in over a year, the scales had balanced. Justice, slow and deliberate, had landed exactly where it belonged. The night after the courtroom showdown, I walked through my Charleston house like a man tracing the edges of a scar. Every room was familiar, but everything felt different, like the walls themselves had been holding their breath for a year and finally exhaled. The dining table where Brittany once slipped something into my glass was spotless. The porch where she'd tried to charm me with banana bread sat quiet under the September sky. Even the hallway mirror, the one I'd caught my reflection in during those tense summer nights, reflected back someone older, yes, but steadier. This house wasn't just lumber and drywall, it was history. Linda and I had built our life here from the ground up. We'd paid off the mortgage penny by penny. It wasn't just property, it was my legacy. And for 13 relentless months, that legacy had been under silent attack. Now it was mine again. Fully, legally, undeniably mine. But victory doesn't erase damage, it just stops the bleeding. David came by 2 days later. He didn't call first. I heard his car crunch up the gravel driveway mid-morning, a sound I'd known since he was 16 and borrowing it for his first date. He stood on the porch like a man unsure of what to say. Dad, he began, hands shoved in his pockets. David, I said evenly. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It was heavy, like fog that hadn't burned off yet. He exhaled hard. I don't even know where to start. You can start with the truth, I said. All of it. He nodded slowly. I knew about her debt. I didn't know she gone that far. I should stopped her, I cut in gently. David, you such not a mind reader, but you such are also not blind. You chose not to look too closely because it was easier. His face tightened. She said she was trying to protect us. I believed her. I know, I said. That's what made her dangerous. She believed it too. He leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the magnolias. When the judge read that ruling, I felt like the floor fell out from under me. I married her. I brought her into this family. And she made choices, I interrupted softly. And so did you. He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes damp. For a long time we stood there without speaking. The September breeze rattled the porch screen slightly like punctuation to our silence. Finally he said, I'm sorry, Dad, for not seeing it, for not listening sooner. I took a slow breath. You grew up watching me trust people who shouldn't have been trusted. You learned avoidance from me. I built this house, David, but I also built those habits. We both carry the blame. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever given my son about the emotional distance between us. And it landed, I could see it in his eyes. He nodded again, slower this time. I want to fix this. That's a start, I said. That afternoon, Frank came over with his usual no-nonsense energy. He stood by the back gate, drill in hand, replacing the old strike plate with a reinforced one. Security upgrades, he said. Symbolic, but hey, feels good. It does, I admitted. He looked at me seriously. You did everything right, Marco. Methodical. You didn't let anger run the show. You let proof do the work. Most people don't have that kind of patience. Patience was the only thing I had, I said. Frank chuckled. Nah. You had guts too, and a damn fine ring camera. We laughed then, not loud, not boisterous, but real. The kind of laugh that comes when tension finally starts to drain from your bones. Later that week, Chloe came by with a bouquet of sunflowers. She looked healthy, confident. She hugged me tightly at the door. You saved more than your house, she said softly. You saved me too. If I hadn't picked up that glass. I shook my head. You didn't pick up the wrong glass, Chloe. You picked up the truth before anyone else did. She smiled at that. We sat at the dining table and talked for nearly 2 hours about family, betrayal, forgiveness. She'd testified bravely, and I told her so. She blushed and waved it off, but I could tell it mattered. Before she left, she squeezed my hand. Don't let this house carry bitterness, she said. Her words stuck with me long after she drove away. That evening, I walked through the house again, barefoot, the way Linda used to. The wood floors creaked softly beneath me. Not ominous now, just alive. I paused at the locked desk drawer in my study. Inside were envelopes, logbooks, affidavits, the paper trail of a year-long war. I didn't throw them out. Not yet. Evidence has a way of needing to exist quietly for a while after justice lands. But I no longer opened that drawer every night. I stepped onto the porch as the sun dipped low, casting the magnolia trees in gold. The gate was locked. The air smelled faintly of the ocean, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace. This house was still mine, and now, finally, it felt safe again. Justice doesn't always roar in with gavel strikes and gasps. Sometimes it comes quietly, sealed in envelopes, typed in legal language, signed with steady hands. The courtroom showdown had been the public climax, but what followed in the months after was the quieter kind of justice, the kind that lives on paper and in official records, where schemers can't charm or manipulate their way out. By late October 2019, Charleston's air had turned crisp, and the magnolia leaves were browning at the edges. I found myself sitting at Marla Green's polished oak desk, fountain pen poised above a stack of estate documents that represented closure in its most permanent form. Once you sign these, Marla said, her tone precise but warm, the estate plan will be airtight. All amendments are recorded. All clauses are legally fortified. Even the most determined opportunist will not find a crack to pry open. I nodded slowly. The top page bore the title, Last Will and Testament of Marco Antonio De Luca, amended November 1st, 2019. The dates mattered to me. Dates were the backbone of the entire case. Every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past year had lived in its timeline, and now this document would be the final entry. I signed my name carefully, feeling the weight of every stroke. Brittany's fraud case had taken its own path through the system. After Judge Connolly's referral in August, the district attorney's office opened an investigation into the forged durable power of attorney and attempted property transfer. Peters, her attorney, tried to stall with procedural delays, But Shaw's surveillance, the notary journal, the clerk's affidavit, and the toxicology report formed a wall too high to climb. In mid-September, Brittany was formally charged with 2 felony counts: fraudulent execution of a legal document, attempted unlawful property transfer. She accepted a plea agreement in late October to avoid a drawn-out trial, probation, restitution for legal fees, and a binding restraining order regarding any future contact with my estate. The irony was thick. She'd tried to take everything quietly, and now the justice against her was just as quiet, but permanent. David didn't defend her. When the charges came down, he cooperated fully with the DA's office. It was the first decisive thing he'd done in months, and though I didn't say it aloud at the time, I was proud of him for it. Frank and I went to the courthouse together to retrieve copies of the filed judgment and restraining order. The clerk handed me a manila envelope across the counter, her nails tapping lightly on its surface. "Everything you need sits in here, Mr. DeLuca," she said. "Certified copies. Keep them somewhere safe." I held that envelope the way some men might hold an heirloom watch. Inside was the legal proof that Brittany's scheme had been dismantled completely, piece by piece, in the same methodical way I'd built my defense. Frank clapped me on the shoulder as we walked down the courthouse steps. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "It feels finished," I said. The final step was mine alone. On November 3rd, 2019, I sat at my old oak dining table, the same one that had been both stage and battlefield over the past year. Marla had left me with a neat folder containing the fully executed estate plan. The key clause was one we'd added back in June 2018, right after the drink incident, a no-contest clause with explicit language stating that any beneficiary who challenged the will without clear evidence would forfeit their inheritance. Brittany had never known about that clause. Now she never would. I flipped through the pages slowly, tracing the embossed notary seals with my fingers. My name appeared again and again in black ink, a quiet assertion of control. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was legacy management. Chloe stopped by a few days later to drop off a thank you card. She'd returned to school part-time, rebuilding her life. She handed me the envelope shyly. Inside she sit written, "Thank you for standing up when it mattered. Not just for yourself, but for everyone she could have hurt." I tucked it into the same drawer where my logbook had lived. Not as evidence, but as a reminder of why I'd done all this. When I walked through the house that evening, there was a different kind of silence. Not the tense, waiting silence that had hovered during the investigation, but a settled quiet. The locks were changed. The estate was secured, and the law had spoken. Justice on paper may not be dramatic, but it endures. Some nights, when Charleston settles into that deep, warm quiet after sunset, I find myself on the porch, watching the light above the door glow softly against the magnolia trees. I used to keep that light on for Linda back when she'd run late from choir practice. It became a kind of unspoken ritual. No matter what, she'd know she could always find her way home. Now that same light means something different. It's not just about welcome, it's about boundaries. The house is locked. The papers are signed. The justice is done. But legacy isn't only about what you keep safe. It's also about what you choose to illuminate. It's been almost 6 months since the courtroom showdown. Life has resumed its rhythms, though they're quieter now, more deliberate. I wake up early. I make coffee. I walk the perimeter of the yard like I used to when the kids were small, checking the fence, listening to the city wake up. Frank still stops by sometimes just to talk about fishing or gripe about local politics. Chloe sends postcards from her classes, little snapshots of a life moving forward. David visits regularly now. Our conversations aren't perfect, but they're honest. Sometimes we sit in the den watching old football games, not saying much. Other times we talk late into the night about things we never touched before. My brother's betrayal back in '98, the ways silence shaped our family. He doesn't make excuses for Brittany anymore, but he doesn't spit venom either. He's learning, like I am, that healing isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about acknowledging it without letting it define everything that comes after. One evening in early February 2020, David and I sat on the porch while the sun dipped low over the treetops. He was quiet for a long time, then finally said, You know, I used to think revenge meant screaming at someone, making them hurt the way they hurt you. I sipped my coffee slowly. And now? He shrugged. Now I think it looks more like this. Quiet, controlled. Just making sure they can touch you again. I nodded. That sefts not revenge. That sefts justice. The difference is what happens afterward. He tilted his head, curious. Revenge is about dragging someone down with you, I said. Justice is about building a fence and leaving the porch light on. They cept you're not welcome back in, but you cept you're not living in the dark either. He considered that for a long moment. You always make things sound simple. They stir not simple, I said softly. They stir just clear. The porch light has become symbolic in a way I didn't expect. Some nights I catch myself staring at it longer than necessary. I think about all the versions of me that stood here. The man who built this house with Linda, the man who laughed with his kids on summer nights, the man who sat silently watching his daughter-in-law tamper with his drink, and the man who meticulously built a legal wall around everything he loved. They're all me. But this version, the one who leaves the porch light on out of choice, not fear, he's the one who survived. Brittany hasn't contacted us since the plea agreement. She can't legally, but even if she could, I don't think she would. People like her thrive in shadows, whispers, manipulation, quiet coercion. She was never built to withstand the cold light of courtrooms and notarized truth. David's divorce proceedings are underway. He's approaching them with a steadiness I didn't see in him before. Maybe watching me build my case taught him something about patience and proof. Or maybe he just finally decided to stop looking away. Either way, I see a man slowly reclaiming his own boundaries, one signature at a time. The house itself has changed too. After everything's settled legally, I replaced the old brass porch light with a new one, sleek black iron with warm LED bulbs. Frank helped me install it one Saturday morning, grumbling about my ladder but refusing to let me do it alone. When we finished, I flipped the switch and watched the glow spread across the porch. Looks good, Frank said, stepping back. It does, I agreed. It wasn't set, just a light. It was a statement. There's set's a line I wrote in my logbook months ago, right after Chloe Set's testimony. Revenge is sent about hurting her. Its scent is about not letting her hurt us again. I underlined it twice back then. Now reading it feels like looking at a chapter I've already lived and closed. People think revenge stories end with explosions or shouting matches. But real justice, lasting justice, ends with quiet choices. Locked gates. Signed documents. A light left on for yourself, not for them. As I sit here tonight, the magnolia trees swaying gently in the coastal breeze, I realize something simple and profound. This house isn't just my retirement or my inheritance. It's a living testament to the boundaries I finally had the courage to set. Brittany didn't lose because I outsmarted her. She lost because she underestimated what patience, truth, and paper can do. She didn't lose me. She gave me away. It was a gray, drizzling morning in late April 2020 when the letter arrived. Charleston has a way of looking soft and muted under light rain. The magnolia trees damp, the streets quiet, the air thick with that sweet earth smell that only comes right before spring truly settles in. I was in the kitchen, buttering toast, when the mail slot clattered. Frank wasn't due over, and Chloe usually texted before dropping by. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward the door. On the floor lay a single white envelope. No return address, just Marco DeLuca typed neatly in black ink. For a moment I just stood there, staring at it. Letters like this had become rare. Everything was email or legal courier these days. I bent down slowly. The wood floor cooled beneath my feet and picked it up. The paper was heavier than usual. Thick stock, deliberate. I didn't open it right away. I carried it to the dining table, the same table where everything had started almost 2 years earlier, and sat down. The sound of the rain against the windows filled the silence. I slit the envelope carefully with my thumb. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Divorce petition, David DeLuca versus Brittany DeLuca. Filed April 16th, 2020. The irony was almost poetic. She'd spent over a year trying to tie herself permanently to this house through fraud, and now she was the one being cut loose on paper in black and white. David came by that evening. He didn't look defeated. He looked resolute. "I guess you got the letter," he said, slipping off his wet jacket. "I did," I replied evenly. He sat down at the table where the petition still lay. He didn't avoid it. He looked straight at it, then at me. "I should have done this a long time ago," he said. "You did it when you were ready," I answered. He nodded slowly. "You know, for a long time I kept hoping she sent to wake up, that we set to fix it. But after everything that came out in court, there's seps no fixing that. Not really. Some things aren't set meant to be fixed," I said softly. "They set meant to be learned from." He exhaled through his nose, half a laugh, half a sigh. "I learned the hard way. Most of us do," I replied. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Brittany didn't contest. Her lawyer filed a short response acknowledging the terms. David's demeanor during those weeks surprised me. He was calm, measured. He showed up to every meeting with his lawyer prepared. Documents in order, no excuses. It reminded me of the way I'd approached my own legal war with her, but this time he was the one drawing the lines. One afternoon in May, after signing the final papers, David and I stood outside the courthouse under a pale blue sky. "You know," he said, hands in his pockets, "for a long time I felt like I was living in your shadow, always reacting to what you did, never really taking control. And now?" I asked. He looked down the courthouse steps, then back at me. "Now I think I finally get it. It sips not about control. It sips about clarity, about knowing what you sips'll accept and what you one sip sight." I smiled faintly. "Sounds like you sep grown up." He laughed softly. "Took me long enough." The letter had been the start of something unexpected, a genuine reconnection between father and son. Not the polite surface-level kind we'd coasted on for years, but something built on shared truths. We started spending more time together, not because we felt obligated, but because we wanted to. We worked on fixing the back fence one weekend. We watched a Saints game the next. Sometimes we talked about Linda, sometimes about the future, sometimes we didn't talk at all. There was one night in early June, sitting on the porch with beers in hand, when David said something that stuck with me. "You know, Dad," he began, "I used to think this house was a weight. Like everything that happened here, Mom dying, your fights with Uncle Tony, Brittany Sips' mess. It just hung over me. But now, I think it sips home again, for real." The porch light cast a soft glow on his face. He looked older, not in years, but in steadiness. "That sips because it is," I said. In July, Marla invited me to her office to sign a short codicil to my will. It wasn't anything major, just a small adjustment to beneficiary language. But that day, as I sat across from her desk, I made one more decision. I added David back in as the primary beneficiary. It wasn't about rewarding him for divorcing Brittany. It wasn't about punishment or redemption. It was about honesty. He'd faced the truth, cooperated with the DA, reclaimed his life, and stood beside me without flinching. People talk about forgiveness like it's a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just a quiet signature on a page. When I got home that evening, the porch light was already on. The air was warm, cicadas humming in the trees. I stood on the steps for a moment, looking at the house that had weathered betrayal, schemes, and storms. The letter that had arrived months earlier wasn't just a legal notice. It was the final twist of irony in a story that had started with a sugar packet and ended with a pen. Brittany had tried to bind herself to this family through lies. But in the end, it was truth and paper that untied her completely. There's a particular kind of quiet in Charleston just before dawn, a stillness that feels almost fragile. The air hangs cool, the streets are empty, and the magnolia leaves glisten with dew under the first hints of morning light. It was on one of those mornings, nearly 2 years after that 4th of July barbecue, that I found myself standing barefoot on my porch, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and looking out at everything that remained. The house, the yard, the gate, the light. All of it was still here, but I was different. When betrayal strikes, it's like a silent earthquake. It doesn't just shake the present, it fractures your memories, forces you to re-examine everything that came before. I'd spent decades thinking legacy was about assets, deeds, and signatures, but standing there, I realized it was about something far quieter. Legacy is about boundaries, about what you protect and what you leave illuminated. The legal battles were over, the house secured, the documents sealed. Brittany's name was nothing more than ink in case files and court records now. She'd faded from our daily lives like a storm that had spent all its fury and moved on. David had grown into his role as caretaker of his own life. Watching him these past months, I saw a steadiness in him I hadn't seen before. Not because he'd become someone new, but because he'd finally decided who he wasn't willing to be anymore. Chloe had finished her coursework, working part-time at a local clinic. She'd come by often with updates, stories about stubborn patients, little reminders that life keeps moving forward even after someone else's betrayal nearly takes you down. Frank and I still sat on this porch some nights, trading half-serious jokes about fishing trips we never actually planned to take. He'd become more than a neighbor. He'd become my anchor during the storm. And me? I'd rebuilt my routines. Not perfectly, but honestly, one day in early August 2020, I opened that evidence drawer for the first time in months. The logbook, the affidavits, the notary copies, they were all still there, neatly stacked, exactly as I'd left them. I didn't need them anymore. I carried the entire stack out to the fire pit in the backyard. The morning air was cool, the grass damp beneath my feet. I set the papers inside carefully, struck a match, and watched the flame catch. It wasn't a dramatic bonfire, just a steady burn, orange edges curling paper into ash. I stood there watching until the last page blackened and fell apart. That drawer had been my fortress for over a year. But a fortress isn't meant to be a home. It's meant to protect until you don't need it anymore. When the last ember died, I felt something inside me unclench. Later that evening, David stopped by unexpectedly with takeout from our favorite Italian place downtown, linguine with clams for me, eggplant parm for him. We sat at the dining table like we used to years ago, before everything fractured. Halfway through dinner, he looked up and said, "You seem lighter lately." I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally decided to stop living in defense mode. He nodded slowly. I asked him glad. It wasn't just a grand moment. It didn't need to be. Sometimes closure doesn't announce itself. It just sits quietly across the table, sharing pasta. As summer turned to fall again, I started leaving the porch light on earlier in the evenings, not out of habit but out of choice. The warm glow spilling onto the steps became something steady and grounding. Neighbors waved when they walked by. Chloe would stop after class sometimes just to talk about her day. Frank would wander over with a beer and settle into the porch swing like he owned it. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home again. I've told this story not because I enjoy revisiting the betrayal, but because I believe in clarity. People romanticize revenge, but they rarely talk about what comes after. What comes after is quieter. What comes after is boundary setting, legal paperwork, patient proof gathering, and a kind of justice that doesn't make headlines but lasts a lifetime. I didn't win by striking back quickly. I won by waiting, by documenting, by refusing to be manipulated. Brittany didn't lose because I destroyed her. She lost because truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. As dawn broke fully that morning, the first light spilling across the porch, I reached over and flipped the porch light off. Not because I was afraid, because the sun was up and I didn't need it anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next, not because I trusted blindly, but because I trusted myself. That's what legacy really is. Not money, not property, not even justice in a courtroom. Legacy is the boundaries you defend and the light you choose to leave on.